I'll kick off with a question that is on Menti, and then we'll go to the floor. So how can the Transport Data Initiative, local authorities and industry be more innovative in making its initiatives more inclusive for all? What opportunities are there for addressing the disparities faced by women, black and minority groups in the technology and data industry in the UK? It's a really good question.
I think technology offers lots of opportunity for hard-to-reach groups. The whole point of transport data is it can be customised. And certainly in Bristol, we've had great examples of people building apps for people with particular disabilities. And so you can focus much more on the needs of particular groups. So I think there are lots of opportunities. I guess funding calls help. My colleague, again, referred quite a lot to Mary Jennings, who runs our Open Data Initiative, but things like hackathons have been very successful, and a number of organisations have sort of spun out apps in that area. So certainly we're very open to that. And if there are particular groups that would like to work with us, then please do approach us.
We've seen some great innovations, definitely, for those areas. So we definitely need to see more, though, definitely. Who's going to be brave and ask a question? Peter. Wait for your mic.
Wasn't quite so much a question as a reflection on the question that you just asked. Look around the room. We are quite male, we are quite white, and we are quite civil servanty.
That doesn't rhyme.
I know, but that it has to start somewhere else. And yes, whilst we do lots of initiatives for various sectors, we have to address the fact that this sector that you're looking at here and the representation that we have in this room is pretty poor. And I don't know what we do to drive that, whether that's driven from the bottom up or whether I don't know, but we're not particularly representative in this room.
No, we're not.
Which is a shame. Even looking this way, 20%, but it's not 20% looking that way.
No.
And I'll add a comment to that. It really hurts. It's not just about representation. It's about diversity of ideas. And in innovation in particular, if you want really good innovation, you have to have ideas that come from everywhere. So we got to do something about it.
I think that's in local government. It's our recruitment process. So we're lucky in our team. We've got quite a diverse innovation team, and that's probably because we have always recruited on the loosest basis possible. And I think that's the reality. If you talk to people, why don't you apply for some jobs, when you hear people that they could easily do them, it's because we put these public sector barriers up that are, I mean, you look through some of the work, like we've just done for a big, really exciting job evaluation session in our area, and the barriers they put up against just our engineers. Like one of the best engineers in the council that I know of does not have a degree. He's theoretically not qualified to do the job he's doing, and it's just you have to put things like that in front of people, and you go, well, he would now not apply for the job he is doing, according to our own. And then there's all little things like that, which, that's him because he's come through a different route. When he interviewed for one of our jobs as well, he hid the fact that he ran a company because he didn't think that was a good skill. He ran a company with a £1.5 million turnover. I was like, that's amazing. Why don't you tell us more about that? People don't see that. I think skills developed in a different sector or a different field or self-employed or many of these, they don't fit well into local government. That's a big issue on our side. And then if you look at that, that's why loads of different people across all different sectors and all different people, why they then don't apply for a government sector job, because it just is seen as as quite hard to get into, and we won't say yes to those jobs. So I think there's issues on that. And then in terms of skills, I think we're way, we're still years behind trying to get a more diverse skill base into our sector. I talked to Carrie from York's just been doing loads of women in tech work in York, and we probably need to do more of that, all of us, in all our areas as well. Just focus on removing some of those perceptions and barriers, because a lot of it is just perceived.
I think there's a society issue as well, is that traditional roles have been considered traditional to traditional sectors.
Yeah.
But if you take a look at Israel from a global procurement perspective, I know that in the Israeli army, engineering disciplines are 50-50 split. So once you've done your military service, you come out the other side, and there's a higher set of engineers that are available within that.
Yeah.
So I think certain disciplines, teaching, childcare and what have you, have a redundant of male role models for them. It's just engineering has always been more of a male bastion. So basically I think it's a generation thing where we need to encourage people more into STEM, but it's actually getting the positive role models in the first place to encourage that. But there may be different approaches that can be adopted. For myself, I know that, for example, in South Africa, they actually have positive discrimination within their processes to enable former injustices, but I would not want to see that, because I think it then creates the wrong approach that you discriminate against one sector for another sector within society. So it's where we want to position ourselves going forward with that.
It's, I mean, I've been in transport for over 20 years, and I'm quite often the only female on a panel or the only female in a room. And to be honest, it's why, for those who know me, you know I always wear bright colours. That's part of the reason. So it's part of the strategy. But come on, girls, come on.
I think the government designed the EV, you know, what was it? Embedding engineering, I can't remember. It's a good tagline, I've forgotten it already. But where they've opened the call for schools to design a future EV charging station, things like that are good.
Yes.
Government-driven projects that a council can support, and then the schools can support and make it simple. Although, to be honest, designing EV charge point I found a bit boring. But anyway, I've encouraged my daughter to get involved. She is designing it up. She's coming up with mad ideas about what you should put into it. But that's like at least something. We should have another 10 of them ready to go.
Yeah. STEM programs are great for that.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got a question from Gary.
So I do have a question, but I can't resist a comment on this. As someone who works with local authorities and central government and has done over the last 5 years, I actually think the UK public sector, I'm not saying there isn't loads to do, but the UK public sector is actually making really good progress around diversity. I don't know if any of you follow Cheryl Stevens from the DWP on Twitter. She leads identity at DWP. She's a big promoter of diversity, and in fact, UK public sectors get far better than the commercial sector at stepping up to the challenge of making teams and workplaces more diverse. So I'm not saying pat yourselves on the back necessarily, but actually the public sector deserves a lot of credit for the work that it's already started. My actual question relates to data trusts. So I don't know if you're aware of some projects that are happening in Jersey around the ability to create data trusts that allow the transparent sharing and exchanging of data. And I'm interested to know from the panel, in the context of transport data, is how much appetite is there, or how much need is there for a framework that makes it easier to share and exchange transport-related data?
Okay, who wants to take that one?
Yeah, so, I mean, certainly we're very keen on frameworks. I mean, we do sort of often also see the sort of the problems with sort of lock-in. So on things like electric vehicle sort of charging points, having open standards is definitely a must. I mean, we don't want to have different standards and differing standards. We want to be able to move from one to the other. And I think likewise for all our data. I mean, one of the things I always sort of repeat is that for a lot of the rules of the road, we have the master data set. We don't want everyone to create their own. We want people to come to us, and we want to provide it once in an open format. But we're still waiting for that. And I know there are sort of projects being run by Ordnance Survey and DFT to look at that, but it can't come soon enough as far as we're concerned.
Anyone else want to comment?
Yeah, I'll comment on that. I think that the data sharing aspect is absolutely critical. Jersey's doing some good work, but I think we have a much more fundamental problem, which is data education, getting rid of the mythology that exists that data has value. No, sharing it has value. Skills in working with it have value, but the data itself, unless you're Google, does not have value. The quantities are too small. The value is in being able to see it in the context of other data. That's one myth. Another myth, which bothers me quite a lot, is that everyone says, oh, if you want to share your data, the first thing you've got to do is, conform to our standards, conform to our data dictionary or whatever. A lot of that goes on. That is really off-putting. I know a guy called Jem Rashbas. He works for Public Health England. He has the largest cancer database in the world. And he said, if you start with the premise that you have to conform to my data dictionary, you will get no data. And his approach is to say, bring us your data. It's not in good condition. I don't care. And because of his GDPR relationship, he's got access to some very personal and sensitive data. Just give it to us. Even if it's bin hex, give it to us. We'll sort the rest, because he's got very techie people who can, work through data sets in a bad state. And then what he does is he gives them back. He says, we found this, we've counted this. And they go, well, that can't be right. That's not what we see at all. So actually you get people subliminally to start being willing to patch their own data. If you said at the start, you've got to patch your data before you give it to us, you wouldn't get any. So it's the education process that I think is important.
I think for me, the key point is around open markets. If you don't have the ability to access data and it's restricting trade, in the West we like capitalist markets. We need to have open to allow competition to develop for the good of society as a whole.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got another question over there from Carrie.
It's not so much a question, but just to contribute to the last discussion point on diversity. Llewellyn's mentioned through the Step Into STEM programme with York City Council, we're actually looking at trying to get more people into STEM professions. And one of the elements we're looking at is educating the educators. So the careers advice that the schools give, it's still quite stereotypical for girls have to go into certain professions, boys have to go into the others. And I'm not so sure that's a gender bias, but just a lack of awareness of the career opportunities that are out there within STEM. So we're looking at doing that and developing that out. And also the IET did a survey last year for all of their members, and 71% of the response said they don't feel able to deliver the industrial strategy because there's just not the skill set there. And that's costing the economy 1.5 billion a year. So there's obviously an economic drive as well to get more diverse people through in STEM professions.
Definitely. That's an interesting start, actually. Okay. Got another question here?
Yes, we have another question. Oh my God. Hi, Anna. Back to I'm glad that it was a man, actually, that pointed out the lack of women and diversity in general in the room. I once went to a conference where it was all men speaking the whole day, and I went up to my male boss at the end, and I was like, I'm so annoyed there was no women. And he's like, what? I didn't even notice. I'm like, Anyway, I guess I just want to make a point of saying, in the transport industry, are we too driven by shiny technology rather than the actual impact it has? And transport is something that affects every single person. Why are we not talking more about the impacts transport can have on people's lives rather than getting caught up talking about automation, electrification? These, like you say, Llewellyn, like being asked to design an electric charging point wouldn't really interest me that much. The impact that can have on the clean air that I breathe, when I walk down the street, that is what I'm personally interested in. I think we need to be talking more about. Would you agree that in the industry we're very driven by money and technology rather than impact that can have?
Good question.
Well, I think we're driven by tarmac. We drive on it and we're driven by delivering. That's my frustration. I don't think we look at user impact. So, we get accused of being focused on delivering autonomy and things in our team. I mean, some of it's a means to an end, but it's also about understanding the market. But some of our best projects have been just about people. So probably one of my favourite projects we've done is one called Cities for People, which was just about community engagement. And actually all we did, it's not really, if you look at it, are we doing anything innovative? No, we're doing what we used to do about 15 years ago, which is go and talk to communities. It's just that through various funding cuts, we stopped doing it. And what did we do out of that? We went and talked to communities and found their needs and their problems. So we got user-driven insight, which was really about just getting to shops from an isolated part of Oxford. What we were able to do, I suppose, because of where our team's positioned, is also align those needs with the commercial investment from the bus operator. So these people want to do this. You want to connect people. That's generally your business as a bus company. And thankfully, we were able to put those two bits of information together to allow them to inform their commercial investment for their on-demand bus service. which is great. So they changed the way they rolled out their model because of what we were doing just with the community. And then now we've overlaid that with more barriers. So some of the barriers of that is a digital product. So we're now teaching people how to use a phone for the first time, some of them. And again, we just went out and bought phones because that was the easiest thing, rather than we're just like, well, have a phone and here's 2 years worth of a contract. And that's been really good because it's good. It's working with people. I think it made us remember what we used to do. People who've been in local government long enough, and the insight you can get from it. And I think we tried to take that into more of the projects we're doing, and that then gives out. I think the good thing about that is you quite often identify really simple solutions that aren't techie at all.
I'm just going to throw 2 things at this. I'm currently doing research around smart stuff in relationship to transport technology infrastructure. And the 2 key points we have is that a lot of the old projects were actually around financial savings, like smart dustbins to reduce thing. But the key point we have found, it has to be around citizen engagement. If you're trying to do smart stuff and it's not around the citizen, why are you doing it? Yeah. It's got to be around that. But I'd also then extend to stuff that we are doing a lot of digitisation. Now, there's got to be a clear decision, definition that ICT isn't digitisation. A lot of the time it's digitisation, people think they're going to take a paper process they currently have and just replicate it into an ICT system. That's not digitisation. Digitisation is finding out why are you actually doing something, who actually uses it, what's the benefit of actually doing it, how do we do it, how should it be done. So the digitisation creates the customer journey, and then you then build your technology around the customer at the centre. If you're doing stuff that doesn't have the customer at the centre or the citizen at the centre, why are you doing it? I was at a conference yesterday, and one of the things we are finding is that a lot of laws, procedures are in place around procurement and so forth, and we're trying to digitise around them, where the whole market's just moving away because of a global agenda rather than a local base nation-state positioning. So very simplistically put, if the citizen's not at the centre, why are you doing it?
I couldn't agree more. I think that there is a magpie instinct in all of us, to get back to your bright, shiny things thing. It's fascinating to see that they're actually reversing the business case for autonomous vehicles into producing them. We've been told an enormous amount about autonomous vehicles, but never the business case. There's a very strong business case for the OEMs, the people that make them, because they're thinking, what do we do for an encore in a mature industry that's really struggling, the motor vehicle industry. There's a huge business case for software engineers because they can make lots of money selling software to the OEMs and others. But the business case for society, what is the user need for this? There are ones, but the amount of people that just tell me, oh, AVs are going to solve this, this, and this, I think, based on what? And did you actually ask whether, you could actually solve a lot of the problems you're describing if you gave people a bus? Promote the value of a bus would do an awful lot more. However, it will happen, it'll get better. The other one is electric vehicles. Can anyone tell me how many tons of carbon the manufacturer of an electric vehicle consumes? No? Well, I'll tell you, it's between about 10 and 20 tons. You will mostly not get that back in the lifetime of the vehicle. You can tell I belong to the Hydrogen Trust. There is an alternative, but we didn't look at the business case. And we're going to ransack the world's supplies of lithium to make lithium batteries. To me, it's crazy, because we didn't start with city needs and user needs. We went for, it's bright, it's shiny, it must be the answer.
It's also the old case as well, isn't it? It's all about energy density. If you've not got the energy density of the fuel or whatever's going, you're not going to achieve it. If you take a look at the London Metal Exchange, they have London's Metal Week, and quite clearly they've identified that the need for the lithium and what have you will not be online until 2027 to actually fulfil the 2022 needs of the government. Also, I do know that from a fleet perspective on procurement, if we were to buy every vehicle available in the country, there's not enough supply into the country to actually to achieve government targets, I've been told.
I wanted to give a plug for our sort of Replicate project again, which I think is a good example of community engagement. And as part of that, I mean, it's slightly different in that it's smart energy for homes rather than transport. But I think the principle is very good, that essentially colleagues sort of worked with community groups and actually developed a bike that essentially went around some of the most deprived communities in Bristol, and basically it would open up and show all the things in terms of the smart goods that you could buy as a way of engaging people. And that's been very successful, and a lot of people have joined that project and are using the smart goods and testing them. And so in that case, we've managed to bring the community on board. But I agree, it's not easy, and sometimes some of the things are quite difficult. So I often have this debate that you can't commercialise some things. So you can't commercialise walking, or it's very difficult to.
Uber trying.
And yet, you know, my colleagues would rather that for small distances people walked and cycled, but they tend to be the more difficult modes, you know, to commercialise. So yeah, I think we are sort of guilty to some extent, but we try, you know, not just to go for the shiny stuff.
It's difficult, I think, with the behaviour change aspect, and certainly you guys probably find the same. We work in transport. We don't always practice what we preach as much as we want to, but transport affects all of us, whether you're working in it or whether you use it. Even if you live in a cave, you probably still have an Amazon delivery, let's face it. So it affects everybody, but we don't always look at that impact aspect because we don't always get that behaviour change. So I wish there was more stuff being done on behaviour change, if I'm honest. We see little snippets of it, but how do we get people to throw away their car keys, for example? And why are the younger people not necessarily driving, or are they? And you know, there's still a lot of data that we need on that. A lot of research needs doing. I'm going to move to a question on here, so I don't forget. So can the local authority speakers provide some detail as to how they fund their innovation teams? Are they self-financing? I think that's you two.
So yeah, well, our team has the same base level budget as it had 5 years ago. So we are financed primarily through Innovate UK, Horizon 2020 projects. The council does still fund 5 members of the team. Yeah, 5 of us. And that funding actually relates to stuff that we still do. So managing the transport model, business cases for tarmac, which is quite frustrating, but we have to do that. And we also now run services for the whole of the county council. So we do social care projects, health projects lately as well. So that's about taking some of the knowledge and skills we've learned from these innovation projects and putting them into projects across the whole of the sectors that we have responsibility for. But yeah, so I think we've evolved, but we always evolved on the basis that we'll never try and get more money, because if you ask for more money from a council, you'll probably get told no, or it'll be cut. So we've always tried to build the team on the basis of external funding, and now we're looking at other funding opportunities. But the team's up to 24 people now, and it's primarily externally funded.
And I mean, likewise in Bristol, I haven't got the exact numbers, but my guess would be probably somewhere around sort of 75% is sort of grant funded, and essentially we're happier the more sort of grant funded we are, because the less we're sort of using the sort of central resources. It tends to be sort of some of the functions are more difficult to fund sort of through competitions. So things like the admin, the training, even the sort of bid writing tend to be sort of costs that you can't claim on a bid. So there are certain things that are not claimable, and so we have a sort of core that's funded through that revenue. But the bulk of my colleagues' work is sort of linked to projects, and that works well. But you probably do need a core as well. I think it would be very difficult to be 100% grant funded.
Are there any local authorities here who do not even have an innovation team?
Cool.
Wow, okay. Okay, I know certainly from the very first TDI that I went to, I sat next to a lady and she said, I'm not really sure why I'm here, to be honest. My boss just told me to come along and find out what it was all about. And through chatting to her, and by the end of the day, she said, I am so glad I came. This has been great because I can go back and tell the transport planners that they need to talk to the data planners, that they need to talk to all the other planners. And there's so many different fragmented groups within your own local authorities that aren't talking to each other internally. And then if you've not got that innovation team cluster, that is, I'm sure, must be quite a challenge, actually.
I think some councils, they're called transformation, change. There's all different names to what they're doing. I do think if you look across what authorities are doing across the whole of the country, I don't think it's very consistent, the approach. A lot of us are stuck in a sector. So some councils have brilliant social care innovation teams that we've gone to learn from, because we're trying to do that now. I think that it's also really similar in that it sits alongside data as well and business intelligence. Yeah. So, lots of councils went on the journey of cutting them. So I always think the senior management cut the things they don't understand, which is why we lost transport modelers about 10 years ago. Then we thought, no, what sort of business intelligence? Then they cut them because they didn't understand it can't be that important. And then they went through 5 years of making non-informed decisions and going, should we make informed decisions again? Yes, you need all those people you cut, but now we can't recruit them because they're data analysts. And do you know how much they get paid in London? So we're going through that cycle at the moment. And we have a tiny business intelligence service for the size of the organisation, and I think lots of authorities are like that. And so it's going to take, I think it's going to take a decade to catch up with where we could have been if we'd have been more progressive 10 years ago.
Oh, hopefully not that long. Are there any more questions from the floor? Yeah, Paul.
I think the route to procurement is one of the hurdles, but I think there's a couple of others that we probably need to consider, and I think they're probably the ones that people forget until they get somewhere along the procurement route, which will be the legal people in terms of clauses in contracts, and also the one that sometimes catches us out is the insurance people. That somewhere in your contract it will say the value of insurance that will be required is X. And typically local authorities being risk averse will say, oh, £20 million minimum type of values. And that's because they're not used to innovation, proof of concept, pilot. What we've had some success with is actually bringing someone from insurance, someone from legal, someone from procurement together at a really early stage and saying, this is what we're doing, come and see, understand what we're doing. Because otherwise you can get quite a way down your procurement route and actually find, you've awarded, effectively, you've said, oh yeah, this is who we want to have our contract with, and then you actually find, oh, actually they can't comply with the clauses that someone in a legal team or someone in insurance is insisting on. So just really wonder from the authorities that have had success in how you've managed to do that. From
CCS's perspective, I think from memory, it depends on framework to framework, but we either do a 522 or 125% for lower values. What I have seen is that there has been discussions and authorities, public contract authorities, have actually sat down with the supplier and actually said, well, our insurance cost for that is £2,500, and you're quoting us £190,000 for a £5 million liability on this. What's the confusion? So sometimes I've actually seen joint insurance being put in place via the brokerage within the public contracting authority to cover the contract, so therefore they've removed it as a clause because it's basically insurance, but the liability sits on the risk process that's adopted with the actual contracting supplier, if that makes any sense. So sometimes these things need to be proportional, and I agree with you entirely, to what is actual the value. Now you're buying a £10 keyboard and it's got a £5 million liability to it, that's inappropriate, but if it's got a £12.50 liability to a £10 keyboard, that's mostly is proportionate to that positioning on things. But there is a lot of discussion around how you get insurance, and I do find that sometimes in suppliers, their corporate insurance can be segmented for an individual policy rather than having a general policy across the company as a whole that then mitigates the costs and reduces the liability for those organisations. So I think actually it's a dialogue to actually figure out what you're trying to achieve and where that insurance needs to come from.
Be future TDI.
Well, I mean, from our point of view, we involved procurement and legal really early on. I think I agree. That's you learn from mistakes you've made in the past, and we've definitely made them. So for the procurement we've just done, that's why it took so long. To be honest, we had to go through numerous discussions to get through the process of doing it. And even more recently, we've still went through the process of working out the insurancing. So we will probably have a different level of insurancing for the proof of concept stage to when we finally procure, because essentially it's a different level of contract. Yeah, it's always an issue.
And I mean, likewise, I mean, we're very familiar with those sorts of problems. I think the procurement team probably probably roll their eyes when they sort of see us coming, because essentially what we want to buy tends to be sort of different from what everyone else buys. Essentially, we're geared up for buying, you know, stuff that we've bought before. And when we buy sort of new services, it gets really confusing. And I think one of the particular difficulties is in the past we sort of bought a thing and owned it, and now we're sort of buying a service, and it's, you know, it's not quite clear what we own and what we don't own. So certainly talk to the insurance people. And some of the examples of things we've come across that have caused us headaches in the early days of electric vehicles, and I imagine everyone else that's in the electric vehicle space, which is probably most of you, will have come across this. You get the questions from the insurance about what happens if someone trips over. And so we had to work through that once. And finally, we got to a point where our insurers were happy that we were okay with putting sort of charge points on the street. But clearly, you've got to go through that before you can deliver the service. And then looking to the future as part of the innovation project, it's been fascinating working with some of our local insurance and legal specialists, so AXA and Burgess Salmon, looking at how you insure calves. And I mean, that's a whole different area. And I mean, it raises lots and lots of issues, but clearly they're going to have to be insured. And you know, how we insure them, I think that there's still plenty more projects there as well.
Yeah.
Get them as part of your consortia.
Yeah.
Only other two things to put into my head, just joining around. You are finding that commercial teams now being formed within some public contracting authorities that then cover legal, so it's a commercial team that's dealing with the commercials. The only other two that does pop into my mind is back-to-back contract for cloud. So people like Amazon, Google and Azure, you may have a contract with yourselves, but their insurance is it's the bill you pay rather than what the liability is. So the back-to-back T's and C's may not support that position. Around that process as well. And the other big one as well around data is cyber. So we're having a look at different forms of what insurances are needed going forward, where we've had public indemnity, private indemnity, professional indemnity, public liabilities, goods inferiority insurance and so forth. But cyber insurance is a whole new world of discussion that needs to be had if your service is based upon the service provisions of where does the cyber insurance sit, what's the cyber requirements, so what have you. So I think that there was a workshop I was at, there's 7 different types of insurances around cyber that you may want to consider and where that does currently sit and what are the back-to-back positions of that insurance. So I think it's going to get more complex, and it's a case of is reinsurance in yourself, and if it's best, what are you trying to offset is the risk, I think is the point we're going to get to.
One of the other things that we want to put on Menti, other than stats about Strava, thanks whoever's doing that, is ideas for future transport data initiatives. So would you find that a session on insurance and that kind of thing would be quite useful? If you would, if it's a challenge area, then please, do put it on here, because Tom will be collating the various suggestions for future sessions. So if you think it's an area that you would find useful, and then we can get the right experts up again to try and answer some of your questions and go through some of the challenges. And we can do it in a workshop style or whatever works. So we always do them differently. I'm going to answer the second part to the next question, but I'm going to pass over on the first one to you guys. How do you scale up innovative projects when data output is not standardised, and what is happening for linking innovative projects together? If I can just answer the second bit first. For those who've been involved in our projects before, and even if you haven't been, on the 1st of August we are having a cohort event, so hopefully you will have heard, if you've been involved in our projects before, through the project manager from those projects who should pass it down to the remaining members of the consortia. On that date we are asking all of the projects from a large connected transport portfolio to come and basically share what they've done. so you can see what those synergies are, because we already know from talking to different projects, we've linked several of our projects together because we've seen what the benefits are of doing that, and we've been able to say, you know, I might go along to one of the meetings and I'll say, you really need to speak to that project because they're doing something similar, or they've got a similar challenge, or you've got a challenge, they've got a solution, and we can link you to the right people, and you can get another project going forward, another collaboration going forward based on those chance meetings. So there will be an opportunity for that at the cohort event. So that will be in Birmingham, and it will be the 1st of August. I can share more details with that. Perhaps when we send the email out, I can share details of that. But the other thing is the Innovation Nation database, once that's available, that I mentioned to you earlier. So you will be able to see a lot of projects on that. Hopefully that will answer that, because you'll give you an opportunity to look for opportunities to link. But going back to the first bit, how do you scale up innovative projects when data output is not standardised?
Why is that a worry? Yeah. I mean, these days, there's fantastic technology that can cope with non-standard data. Great if you can start with standard stuff, but if you can't, you can still interrogate it. I work with some brilliant data scientists. They'll cope with anything. One of the guys I worked with was at CERN. He then did 10 years in investment banking and trusts, and now he's in a software company. Those guys can cope with this stuff. Well, obviously, we'd rather not. But I don't think non-standard data is a worry, really.
Middleware's been in the industry since mainframes, to my knowledge.
Yeah, I think there's more tools available now to the market that allows you to cope with standard. So some of the partners we're working with, that's what we just throw it at them, and it comes out at the other end.
Sausage machine.
Yeah, but it is, and so it's become less of an issue, and also it's what you're using data for. So quite often the scalable bit is if you are solving a problem. So it's the data sometimes is interchangeable. It's if you found a solution to a problem, it then starts to become scalable. I think, yeah, I mean, so one of the areas that's our most scalable projects, probably not in transport, to be honest, they're in social care, where we've been able to do quite quick proofs of concepts, and the data is not. There's a very thin layer of it. It's actually working with users and understanding then how adapting an application and then being able to scale it up from quick and dirty proof of concepts, and hopefully into some products that are useful for people who have received social care and ourselves as we manage it. But yeah, so we use whatever data we can get for insight, and it changes from project to project. I don't think the standardisation is not, well, it's not as big as people think it is. I think you can, like Nick says, you can always find someone who can solve that one.
Yeah, someone will always find a solution.
Yeah.
So I have a plea on this one, which is good documentation. We work with suppliers that have good documentation and suppliers that have bad documentation, and it makes our life a lot easier and much more likely to use you if you have good and sort of documentation. So I mean, we do a lot of that sort of changing formats. I mean, we use a bit of software called FME, and essentially it sort of sucks in data from lots of providers and then sends it out in whatever format we need. We've also become very familiar with APIs, and sort of open APIs that are well documented makes everyone's life a lot easier. Yeah. And what we've tended to find is doing it the first time is the really, really difficult bit, because every protocol is different, and cracking it the first time is really difficult. Once you've cracked it, the computer will then do it, you know, for years and years, and unless something changes, it will do it right. So, and there's probably some space for actually sort of sharing those conversion protocols, because there's no point everyone translating things themselves. And the other thing we found that does cause some problems is obviously changes of suppliers, and then you have to go through it again, and it's painful. But we know that for good procurement reasons, we need to be able to change suppliers, but it's never easy.
Okay, right. So someone's put up about future TDI suggestions. I think this is a great idea, actually. And skills and training, apprenticeships for transport data science. Is that something that a lot of people would find quite useful? Yeah, there's people nodding. Are we able to say anything about it? Yeah, apprenticeship. Do you want to... Is there a mic somewhere for Peter, please? Because this is something that we're discussing on the policy group, so it'd be quite a good segue into discussing that.
So local authorities, we obviously saw the introduction of the apprenticeship levy a couple of years back. 0.5% of our staff costs go into the apprenticeship levy, which goes into central government. We claim it back as and when we train people. There is a skill shortage around transport data. I don't think the need for skilled people in transport data is going to get lower. CAV, autonomy, connection, whatever it is, there is going to be a lot more transport data running around. We talked earlier about One Transport. One Transport was a project we were involved in. Probably the primary reason that we didn't continue with One Transport was we didn't have the skills to exploit the platform or the data we had in it. So for me, this is one of the things that I've thought about, and actually being able to spend some of the money that we give to government to train people to do things that's going to be really important for us going forward is in my head, is a really good idea. As Carla said, we've talked about it at the TDI policy group, but I think that ability to get those skills and for us, and I know there are lots of private sector people in the room, which is fantastic, but not necessarily to go out and pay £800 a day for a consultant when we can train our own people we will train them and then they will go off and be consultants at £800 a day. But I'd rather train those people and have them internally within our own organisations. So I think things like apprenticeships, things like whether they're degree level, post-degree, whether they're kind of 18-year-olds coming in and just being schooled in data science, I think is really important.
Excellent, thank you.
But it needs support from local authorities.
Yeah.
That needs one of those things, and Llewellyn and I have talked about this, and
Yes,
that kind of level of, is there a demand for this? Does every local authority need 3 people who are skilled in this kind of thing, and what will our needs be in the future?
We've got 3 apprentices in our team, and 2 of them are data analysts. There's a level 4 data analyst qualification you can get through the apprenticeship program. So there's already, the qualifications are already, I suppose the apprenticeship side is sort of getting better.
Yeah, it was a specific spin of transport data that, and again, whether it's a level 4 or whether it's actually almost a master's that follows on after that. But
But, I mean, the person we managed to recruit is brilliant, and that's after spending 2 years of trying to advertise for a post, because everyone who had the qualifications required, based on our standardised recruitment processes, can earn twice as much at least in the commercial market. And we're working against an area where the people, data analysts, data science, there's hundreds of companies want those people in Oxfordshire in the southeast. So we went down that route. It's been really good, very successful, and it's hopefully we can then get a chance of retaining them. The other way we've got a person is through funding them through PhDs. So our other data analyst was a PhD student, and we're hopefully going to retain him if we can work out how we do that. But we're going to fund a couple more as well, and one of them specifically will be around transport data.
So there are some solutions available, so that could be a useful topic. Tom, I know you're making notes for future sessions, so that it could be a useful topic by the looks of it. There's quite a few of you nodding, so okay. We've just got a couple more minutes before lunch. Any more questions from anybody?
Hi, George Luntz from ACOM. I've got a question around data ownership. We're seeing more recently data being held by the private sector rather than the public sector, particularly with mobile phone data, for example, and how that feeds into transport. I'm just interested in the panel's view, and maybe people around the room as well, is that in terms of the general trend and that data, accessing that data will obviously come at a cost, and how do you address that balance between potentially capital investment now so it can retain within the public sector, for example, or actually low investment now and a more revenue-based model where that data is procured? And is there a strategic opportunity now to actually sort of make a decision about which way to move in with the rollout of 5G, for example? Seems like an opportunity to sort of set that strategy now in the right direction.
We're looking at what comes off the back of data with our street lighting contracts, because we're going to, as part of that, we're putting out a county-wide network that's And obviously there's 5G opportunities off the back of that. The government's bringing its own regulations around access to infrastructure, which may not help the conversation in some respects. So it's an evolving conversation, I think, at the moment. I think the way we're looking at it with the modelling, because we have to look at this for the transport, because essentially at some point we want to potentially an always-on data source. Mobile phone data is unaffordable, the amount. So I think mobile phone data might be a validation set of data you draw down as and when you have to. We're looking at actually gathering more of our own data than we were previously thinking of. Okay. So that'll be off what we put out on streetlights. So it's probably lower validation levels of data, but it gives us an it's a level of indication that gives us a level of confidence that means we can act on it. And then you draw down, when you need, a higher level quality of data, higher level of validation that sort of validates your model algorithms for the network management. But yeah, I think with the last one, I raised the issue to Graham about capital funding. Government funding is capital driven at the moment and not revenue, when the whole transport world's moving to a revenue driven model. So it's government, isn't it? We'll have a 10-year lag. In 10 years' time, we'll probably be saying, but it will take ages to catch up, I think.
I'm just going to let Peter Lee from British Standards Institute just chip in there, because you probably...
Thank you, Carla. Yeah. Just building on Llewellyn's point, we're doing some work, a study with the West Midlands Combined Authority at the moment, who won the 5G Urban Connected Communities funding. And of course, we've got the Rural Connected Communities competition coming up. But we're looking at the assets that they have at the moment, such as lampposts, that could be used in sort of future rollouts of 5G, and also what the local authorities are trying to want in partnership. And the way we work is through consensus, so we'd really appreciate working with yourselves and other members of TDI to understand what your challenges are that you're trying to face, and that there could be a sort of a sweet spot where 5G, the mobile network operators are wanting access to infrastructure, and you're needing access to data. How can we bring that forward so that local authorities have the data that you need? You're right, there's the regulatory reviews going on and all sorts of cyber issues as well. Yeah. But it is a real key challenge for UK PLC and internationally. How are we going to evolve and support sort of citizen-centred service development?
Thank you, Peter. We are being told to...
Let's lunch.
I got that sign from the back. There are more questions coming up, and we will hopefully have an opportunity later on in the afternoon. But lunch is for 1 hour, 45 minutes? Yes, around there. Okay, 45 minutes. You'll be summoned back, I'm sure. But please do use the opportunity to chat with people and ask any questions about the presentations you've seen. And thank you to everybody for their presentations this morning and for being on the panel, and for you for listening. And come back later on, because there will be the DFT, Department for Transport, will be doing a really interesting workshop. So I think it will be really useful. So please do stick around for that this afternoon. Thank you.